Okay, guys, let's start our reading again. And again, a reminder we're reading from Gods of the Bible. And the last chapter we discussed back and forth with the Elohim, the sign of Cain, the antediluvian patriarchs, uh, the great descent, walking with the Elohim, literally walking and flying away with the Elohim, and the anointment of Enoch. Okay, and we are going to start this time on page 113, and we're talking about the giants. This should be fascinating. Let's get started. Their days will be 120 years. Let us now turn to a subject that has always caused considerable confusion among traditional commentators. After the creation of Adam and Eve, Genesis recounts the events of the expulsion from Eden and presents us with the rich and complex genealogy of the descendants of the first couple, which we have addressed at length in the previous chapter. Seth was begotten by Adam in his image and likeness. After having begotten other sons and daughters, Adam died at 930 years. This age should not surprise us. Adam was a direct product of the grafting of genetic material by the Elohim. We can assume that Adam, like all other antediluvian patriarchs, possessed the quality of longevity that resulted from the genetic heritage of the Elohim. At one point, the Elohim decided to intervene again and shorten the age of the Adamites, as written. This is Genesis 6:3. My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. What caused the Elohim's intervention? The Adamites had begun to multiply on earth and, of course, had daughters. As we have seen in the previous chapter, the Elohim who had descended on earth were probably males. It is not difficult to imagine that the natural needs and perhaps the desire to give new stability to the life they now spent on earth must have directed the attention of these individuals to the female half of the new species. The author of Genesis 6:2 tells us, and again it shows the Hebrew words with the English words underneath it. And let me show that to you briefly so you can see what I'm talking about. Here at the top. Okay. And it looks like you're supposed to read it from right to left. And saw sons of the Elohim, daughters of the Adam, that beautiful or good they and took. For them, women, females, from among everything, all, those that they chose. First, let us point out that the Tavat is usually translated as beautiful, but it also means good in the sense of capable, suitable. So these women had to be good, i.e., suitable, to enter into a relationship, start a family, and engage in sexual relations and procreation. The continuation of this story, however, portrays the anger and displeasure of God for the interbreeding. The Elohim expressed their displeasure at the wickedness of man, at the extensive failure of humankind, and in the face of this terrible sin, decided to wipe humanity from the face of the earth. Therefore, God sends the flood, Genesis 6:5-7. When we read this passage, we cannot help but ask ourselves the following questions. Could this omniscient God not foresee what would happen after he created the new species? Did he not know that the behavior of his creatures would depend on the qualities he gave them? What sense does it make to endow a creature with the freedom to decide its fate and punish it because its choices do not correspond to the will of the Creator? Is this not entirely gratuitous cruelty? Can a spiritual God hate his creatures so much to want their death? What sense does it make to exterminate animals with an unescapable flood because of faults that can only be attributed to humankind? In short, the theses of existence of a spiritual God, able to create everything out of nothing, but unable to foresee the consequences of his choices, and therefore forced to change his mind and take remedial action, has some very puzzling aspects. According to our hypotheses, however, this can be explained quite simply. The Elohim who created humankind belonged to a technologically advanced race, but were undoubtedly not endowed with omniscience and omnipotence. The second subtopic: there were giants on the earth in those days. As seen in the previous chapter, this story is also told with some details in the book of Enoch. The first part tells of the fall of the sons of heaven, who saw that the daughters of the Adam were desirable and decided to take them as wives. 200 of them agreed to this. However, their leader, Semenzaja, knew that this decision would arouse the wrath of the lords of the empire, and he feared that he alone would be held responsible. Thereupon, his companions agreed to share the responsibility. They gathered on Mount Hermon, a mountain range in the southeast of Anti-Lebanon, and swore not to abandon the project and to carry it out without hesitation. Then they began to seek out the earth women and teach them practical knowledge, such as the cultivation and harvesting of plants and their use for therapeutic purposes. In short, they taught them, as the text says, the secrets of the early days. They thus began to have sexual relations with them, and giants were born. The Bible confirms the giants' presence on earth in Genesis 6:4. And again, we're looking at the Hebrew words with the English words at the bottom, reading from right to left. The Nephilim were on the earth, and in the days those, and also after this, that were entered sons of the Elohim, from daughters of the Adam, and had birthed. To them they, the strong, who for always men of the name famous. The first problem in this section is its ambiguity. The Nephilim giants were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of the Elohim went to the daughters of the Adam. That's Genesis 6:4. It is impossible to understand with absolute certainty whether the Nephilim were the product of the interbreeding between Adamite women and the sons of the Elohim, or whether they existed independently of them. If the giants were the product of the interbreeding between the two species, we should have found an expression indicating that giants were present only afterward. Instead, we read that they were present in those days and also afterward, which leads us to believe that their presence preceded the interbreeding between the two species, or at least occurred simultaneously with it, but not as a direct consequence of it. This is all the more stimulating when one considers that the problem is not only chronological, were giants already on the earth, or are they the product of the interbreeding? But also concerns the meaning of the term Nephilim itself. We shall return to it later at the end of this chapter, but let us first emphasize some other aspects that are important. The Bible takes up the term giants in many places and call them different names. And again, I'm showing the heat. Let me show you. Show both sides. This is one I just read, and then here's what I'm about to read regarding the giants. The Hebrew word, and it says Anakim. The next one is Rephaim, or Rephaim. The next one is Emim. And the last one is Zamzumin. In Numbers 13, we read the story of Moses sending scouts to the Promised Land. His people were still in the desert of Paran, and the conquest of the land of Canaan had to be carefully planned. They needed to know what the land was like, who lived there, whether the inhabitants were numerous or sparse, what defenses the cities had, where the camps were located, and what kind of vegetation could be found. In short, although this was a land promised by God, Moses knew well that it would be necessary to conquer it with military force and using wise and thought out strategies. The Elohim Yahweh was powerful, but not omnipotent. In this regard, Moses had no doubts, and when the land had to be conquered through his efforts. Therefore, he sent out scouts to gather the necessary information. After 40 days, the scouts returned with news and products of the land. They reported that the land was desirable, but strong and savage people inhabited it. Some of the scouts even claimed that the conquest of this land was an impossible undertaking. Numbers 13:28. And again, the Hebrew words, and also born of the Anak, we saw there. The explorers emphasized that they saw the sons of Anak, that is, the Anakim. They justify their statement by saying that they carefully observed the land to be conquered. Numbers 13, 32, and 33. Hebrew words again, and all the people that we saw in the middle them of men stature. More Hebrew words. And there we saw the Nephilim, sons of Anak, from the Nephilim, and we were, in our eyes, like the locusts, and so were we in their eyes. In passing, let us note the assonance between the Hebrew term Anakim and the Sumerian Anunnaki, which defines the probable Sumerian Akkadian counterpart in the biblical Elohim. The explorers expressed their awe as they saw men of unusual size and stature. In the eyes of the Anakim, who belonged to the descendants of the Nephilim, they must have appeared, it is said, like locusts. The comparison with the locusts could not refer to quantity, which in this case would have been advantageous to the Israelites, but to size. Their sheer size was the reason for the fear that seized the messengers. The scouts concluded their report by saying that these people were stronger than them. The same incident is repeated in Deuteronomy. When the Israelites are in Arava, on the other side of Jordan, Moses gives a speech in which he recalls the events that took place during the desert pilgrimage. He also recalls the time when the Israelites rebelled against the will of the Elohim who guided them. He says that the people grumbled and would not go forward in conquest of Canaan because Deuteronomy 1:28. Again, the Hebrew words. People, mighty, tall being, and more of us, cities great and inaccessible in up to the skies, and also sons of Anakim we saw there. Moses then recalls how Yahweh fought for them many times. In this context, we can only express our disappointment that the non canonical book entitled The Book of the Wars of Yahweh, cited in Numbers 21:14, has been lost, because it would have shed light on what this Elohim specifically did in battle. Of these battles, unfortunately, only a vague memory is preserved in the Bible. In this regard, we now ask some questions that express a fundamental doubt. Wars of Yahweh disappeared, or has it been deliberately made to disappear? Is it guarded by those who cannot allow accurate accounts of the wars of Yahweh to undermine further the image of the spiritual God created by the theologians? Would the accounts of the wars Yahweh be consistent with what church preachers today about the infinite and universal mercy of God? In Deuteronomy 2:9, Moses lists the commandments he received from Yahweh. In particular, he was not to fight Moab because the sons of Lot, Abraham's grandson, had already taken possession of the land of Ar. He says that in the land of Ar, Deuteronomy 2:10, the Emen before, again the Hebrew words, the Emen before they dwelt in it, people great and numerous, and being tall, like the Anakim. The story continues in the next verse with further clarification. Again, Hebrew words, Rephaim, giants, were considered also they, like the Anakim. The term Emen itself can mean terrible. The Emen were thus great and considered Rephaims, like the sons of Anak, who were of the lineage of the Nephilim. In this situation, Moses urges his people not to fear, for the Elohim, Yahweh, will fight before him and destroy his enemies. Deuteronomy 9:2-3. Even though they, Hebrew words again, people great and being tall, the Israelites actually wonder, who will resist in the faces of sons of Anak? Anakim, Rephaim, and Emen are always compared, identified with each other, and all considered to be of the same lineage of the Nephilim, being of tall stature, who had fallen, descended from above. They are strong and powerful people who struck terror, and those supposed invincibility induced the people of Israel to give up the conquest of their land. Deuteronomy also reminds us of the name and size of one of these Rephaim, Deuteronomy 3:11. For only Og, king, survived. From the remnant of the Rephaim, behold, its bed of iron, 9 cubits in length, and 4 cubits in width. Knowing that a cubit measures the distance from the elbow to the tip of the finger, i.e., about 17 inches, the result is a bed 12.8 feet long and 5.6 feet wide. The narrator then mentions that the bed was still in Rabbah, in the Ammonite area at the time of the narrative. It could still be seen. Deuteronomy 3:11 says, Og, king of Bashan, was the last of the Rephaim. His bed was decorated with iron, and was more than 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. It is still in Rabbah. It is still in Rabbah of the Ammonites. Wow. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop here for right now. We're going to continue on page 121, David and Goliath. This is fascinating. Till next time, y'all. Stay tuned.